they told you it was just a rock. They told you it was frozen, lifeless, and drifting harmlessly through the void. They lied. The story of 3I Atlas isn't about a comet. It's about the day we lost the luxury of ignorance. For the last 18 months, the world's most powerful institutions have been suppressing a truth so terrifying that it has astrophysicists contacting their families and telling them to get out of the cities. Scientists have uncovered evidence that shatters every model of physics we have. They know 3I Atlas isn't just tumbling through space, it's making decisions. They know it's not slowing down, it's waiting. And they know that while it was hidden behind the sun, it changed into something else entirely. Today, we are going to look at the data they deleted. We're going to expose the leaked spectral analysis that NASA pretended was a glitch. But I have to warn you, once you understand what is actually moving toward Earth right now, you will never look at the night sky the same way again. This isn't a headline, it's a countdown, and it's almost at zero. Section 1. The pattern of denial. It all began quietly, the way the worst disasters always do. First, with curiosity, then with ridicule, and finally, with a silence so absolute it felt louder than a scream. To understand why the world is currently holding its breath, you have to go back. You have to understand that 3I Atlas didn't appear in a vacuum. It arrived in a scientific community that was already traumatized, already divided, and desperate to avoid another public relations nightmare. The trauma started in 2017 with an object called Oumuamua. You remember the name. It was the first interstellar object ever detected passing through our solar system. It was weird. It was shaped like a cigar, or perhaps a pancake tumbling end over end. It accelerated away from the sun without any visible means of propulsion. No gas, no tail, no dust. For a brief, terrifying window, serious scientists at Harvard and the Pentagon asked the question, is it artificial? But the establishment crushed that question. They ridiculed the people asking it. They came up with increasingly desperate natural explanations. They said it was a hydrogen iceberg, a theory that had never been observed in nature. They said it was a dust bunny made of rock. They fought tooth and nail to return to the status quo, to a universe where rocks are just rocks and we are the only things that matter. When the second visitor, Borisov, arrived in 2019, they breathed a sigh of relief. Borisov was normal, it had a tail, it outgassed, it behaved exactly like a comet should. It was the good visitor, the one that proved the skeptics right. It allowed the scientific community to go back to sleep. So when the Pan-SDARRS telescope in Hawaii picked up a faint, moving point of light late last year, the mood in the control room wasn't fear. It was routine. It was boredom. The automated systems flagged it as a standard hyperbolic trajectory, an object moving fast enough to escape the sun's gravity, meaning it came from outside our system. They named it 3I Atlas. 3I for the third interstellar object. Atlas for the survey system that found it. The initial press release was written before a human being had even properly analyzed the spectral data. It was a template. You could practically see the insert name here brackets in the text. Astronomers have detected a small, icy body entering the inner solar system, the release said. Likely a fragment of a planetary system ejected eons ago. Harmless. Interesting, but harmless. For 3 weeks, that was the truth. It was a headline you scrolled past on your phone while waiting for your coffee. Another space rock. Cool, moving on. But while the public moved on, a small group of people stopped sleeping. It started in the amateur astronomy community. These aren't just hobbyists with backyard telescopes. These are retired optical engineers, data analysts, and obsessive skywatchers who often spot things the big government observatories miss. They were the first to notice the glitch. An amateur astrophotographer in New Zealand, posting under the handle Southern Skywatcher, uploaded a series of long-exposure images to a niche forum. The caption was simple: where is the coma? A comet, by definition, is a dirty snowball. As it falls toward the sun, it heats up. The ice turns to gas, sublimation. This creates a fuzzy envelope around the nucleus called a coma, and eventually, a tail. 3I Atlas was well within the frost line. It was crossing the orbit of Mars. It should have been lighting up like a Christmas tree. It should have been spewing tons of water vapor and dust every second. But in the images, 3I Atlas was a razor-sharp point of light, a dead pixel in the sky. It must be a rock, the skeptics in the comments argued. An asteroid, not a comet. It's metal or stone, no ice. That explanation made sense. If it's just a rock, it doesn't melt. If it doesn't melt, it doesn't have a tail. Problem solved. The forum moderators marked the thread as resolved. But then the orbital data dropped. Every object in space obeys the laws of gravity. It's the one rule you can't break. If you know the mass of the sun and the speed of the object, you can predict exactly where that object will be in 10 minutes, 10 days, or 10 years. It's a clockwork universe, but 3I Atlas wasn't following the clock. The Minor Planet Center, MPC, is the global clearinghouse for this data. They release MPEC, Minor Planet Electronic Circulars, that update the orbits of thousands of asteroids daily. On November 14th, an MPEC was released for 3I Atlas. It showed a deviation. The object was moving faster than gravity alone could explain. This is where the comet explanation becomes vital. Remember, comets accelerate because of the rocket effect. The gas shooting out one side pushes the comet the other way. That is the only natural mechanism we know of that can make a space rock speed up. So here was the paradox that started the panic. 1. The visual data proved 3I Atlas had no gas, no tail, and no coma. It was a dead rock. 2. The orbital data proved 3I Atlas was accelerating as if it had an engine. You cannot have both. A dead rock cannot accelerate. A speeding comet cannot be invisible. This contradiction sat in the public database for 6 hours, just 6 hours. I managed to speak with a doctoral candidate from a major European university who saw that data before it was pulled. He agreed to speak only if I used a voice changer and hid his identity. We'll call him Thomas. Thomas told me, I thought it was a sensor error. That's the first thing you think. The telescope bumped or the timestamp was wrong. I ran the numbers through my own Python script just to see how big the error was. But the error bars were tiny, the sigma was huge. This thing wasn't drifting, it was thrusting. Thomas posted his findings to a private Discord server used by researchers. Usually these servers are full of banter, memes, and academic arguments. But that day, the response was different. Within 10 minutes, a senior researcher, someone whose name you would recognize from TV, messaged me privately, Thomas said. He didn't say I was wrong, he didn't ask to see my math, he just said, take it down, now. That was the first crack in the dam. The realization that the people at the top didn't need to check the math because they already knew. By the next morning, the MPEC was updated. The data was corrected. The acceleration numbers were smoothed out. The official note claimed a processing artifact due to background star interference. The anomaly was erased from the record, but the internet never forgets, and the sky doesn't lie. As 3I Atlas drew closer to Earth, the behavior became more aggressive. It wasn't just speed anymore, it was direction. In orbital mechanics, there is a maneuver called a gravity assist. We use it all the time with our own probes. We fly a spacecraft close to a planet to steal a little bit of its momentum and sling ourselves further out into space. It's a delicate dance of physics. 3I Atlas performed a gravity assist, but it didn't use a planet. It used a point in empty space. Let me repeat that. The object made a course correction, a sharp, angular turn, at a specific coordinate that had no massive body nearby. It turned as if it were pivoting around an invisible planet. The only way to do that is if you apply force, if you steer. This was the moment the Whisper network ignited. If you work in academia, you know about this. There are the official emails, the ones subject to Freedom of Information Act requests, the ones that are polite and professional. And then there are the signal chats, the encrypted messages that disappear after 1 hour. In these chats, the word comet had been abandoned entirely. The researchers were using a different term. They were calling it the probe. Detailed analysis of the light curve, the way the brightness flickers, suggested the object was essentially a flat surface, not a cigar, a sheet, a sail, or perhaps a wing. It was tumbling in a controlled rotation, keeping one face strictly oriented away from the sun, perhaps to act as a heat shield, perhaps to hide something. But publicly, the silence was deafening. NASA held a press briefing on upcoming solar cycle events. A journalist from a small tech blog asked about 3I Atlas. The panel dismissed it with a wave of the hand. It's a fascinating crustal fragment, the lead scientist said, looking down at his notes, refusing to make eye contact. We are seeing some outgassing of dark, transparent volatiles, nothing unusual. Dark, transparent volatiles. I want you to think about that phrase. They invented a new state of matter to explain this away. They were asking us to believe in invisible gas that has mass but no spectral signature, that creates force but no heat. They were rewriting chemistry to avoid admitting they were looking at technology. And then came the data blackout. On December 2nd, the SOHO Solar and Heliospheric Observatory satellite, which watches the sun 24/7, went into emergency safe mode. 2 hours later, the Stowaway spacecraft, which provides a different angle of the solar system, experienced a high-gain antenna anomaly and stopped transmitting images. The Goldstone Deep Space Communications Complex in California announced unscheduled maintenance on its main dish. 1 failure is an accident, 2 is a coincidence, 3 is a protocol. They were blinding us. 3I Atlas was approaching its perihelion, its closest point to the sun. This is the moment of maximum truth. If it was a ball of ice, the sun would melt it. If it was a rock, the gravity would sling it. But if it was something else, this was the moment it would reveal itself, and they made sure we couldn't watch. For 4 days, the public feeds were static. The internet was flooded with old images, looped GIFs of the sun from 2014, and reassuring tweets from official accounts saying, "Just a solar flare. Systems returning shortly." But there was no solar flare. We checked the magnetic logs. The sun was quiet. The only thing happening in our solar system was the silent, invisible passage of 3I Atlas behind the star. What happened in those 4 days? What did the classified sensors see that the public ones were forbidden to show? We found the answer in a leaked server log from the Atacama Large Millimeter Array, ALMA, in Chile. It wasn't an image. It was a frequency table. ALMA looks at the universe in radio waves. It listens to the cold dust between stars. But on December 4th, right in the middle of the blackout, ALMA was pointed directly at the sun's corona, a region it usually avoids because the sun is too loud. It wasn't listening to the sun, it was tracking a source behind the sun. The log shows a signal spike, a pulse, pure, mathematical, and repeating, 1/618 gigahertz, the golden ratio, phi, a number that represents perfect geometrical proportion. A number that doesn't just happen in the random noise of solar radiation. The signal lasted for 8 seconds. Then it stopped. When the observatories finally came back online, when SOHO fixed its safe mode and stereo, realigned its antenna, the data feed resumed as if nothing had happened. But there was one crucial difference. The trajectory of 3I Atlas had changed again. Before the blackout, the object was on a hyperbolic escape trajectory. It was supposed to swing around the sun and shoot back out into deep space, never to return. That's what visitors do. They say hello and they leave. But the new numbers, the ones buried deep in the raw coordinate files, showed that 3I Atlas had slowed down. It had shed velocity. It had dumped momentum. You don't slow down during a gravity assist. You speed up, unless you are trying to stay. The object had shifted from an escape orbit to a capture orbit. It wasn't leaving. It was settling in. The realization hit the few of us paying attention like a physical blow. The harmless rock had just performed a braking maneuver. It had entered a high eccentricity loop that would bring it back around not in 10,000 years, but in 6 months. And where would Earth be in 6 months? Exactly in its path. The pattern of denial was no longer just about saving face or avoiding panic. It was a tactical delay. The governments of the world weren't ignoring 3I Atlas. They were preparing for it. They knew that the moment the public realized the rock had brakes, society would fracture. So they kept the Comet label. They kept the dark hydrogen theory. They kept the smile on the news anchor's face. But look at what they did, not what they said. Look at the sudden movement of the U.S. Navy's Atlantic Fleet. Look at the emergency stockpile orders for rare earth-shielding materials issued by the Department of Defense on December 10th. Look at the abrupt resignation of the head of the European Space Agency, citing personal health reasons, 2 days after the blackout ended. They are battening down the hatches. They are clearing the decks. The denial is not a mistake. It is a strategy. They are trying to run out the clock. They are hoping that by the time you realize what 3I Atlas really is, it will be too late to ask questions. It will be too late to demand the truth. Because the truth is no longer a scientific curiosity. The truth is currently accelerating towards us at 60 kilometers per second, carrying a message that we are not ready to hear. The comet is gone. The traveler is here. And it is not just passing through. Section 2, the anomaly manifests. If Section 1 was about the silence, the calm before the storm, Section 2 is about the noise. Not the noise of a chaotic universe, but the specific, terrifying noise of a pattern emerging where there should be none. This is the part of the story where the math stops adding up, and the people who have dedicated their lives to logic start looking for a place to hide. To truly understand the panic that gripped the inner circle of the global scientific community, we have to move past the headlines and get into the raw data. We have to look at the numbers that made grown men in control rooms at JPL and the European Space Agency turn pale. The anomaly wasn't a single event. It was a cascade. It was a series of impossible contradictions that started small and grew into an avalanche that buried the comet hypothesis forever. It began with the energy crisis. The universe runs on a very strict budget. We call it the law of conservation of energy. It's the first rule of physics: you cannot get something for nothing. If a car speeds up, it burns gas. If a rocket accelerates, it burns fuel. If a comet speeds up, it burns ice, turning it into gas that shoots out the back. But 3I Atlas was breaking the law. When the object crossed the orbit of Jupiter, it was moving at 26 kilometers per second. By the time it crossed Mars, it should have been moving at 32 kilometers per second, purely due to the sun's gravity pulling it in. That's the freefall speed. But the telemetry from the Deep Space Network showed it was moving at 38 kilometers per second. That extra 6 km/s doesn't sound like much. But in terms of energy, it is massive. To accelerate a 2-kilometer-wide mountain of rock by that amount would require millions of tons of propellant. It would require a tail of gas so bright and massive that you could see it with a pair of binoculars from your backyard. But as we've established, there was no tail. There was no gas. There was no dust. So where was the energy coming from? This question landed on the desk of Dr. Eris Thorne, a pseudonym, but his real identity is well known in the Whisper Network. Thorne is a specialist in non-gravitational dynamics at a top-tier California university. He doesn't believe in aliens, he believes in math. When Thorne saw the initial velocity vectors, he assumed the data was corrupted. "It looked like a sensor drift," he wrote in a now-deleted blog post. "I thought the Doppler shift calculations were off. You see this sometimes when the reference star catalogs are outdated, so I recalculated it manually." Thorne spent 3 days running the numbers. He stripped away every variable. He accounted for the solar wind pressure. He accounted for the Yarkovsky effect, where heat makes an asteroid spin and drift. He even accounted for the gravitational tug of Jupiter's moons. The result was always the same. 3I Atlas had an excess acceleration of 0.4 cm/s2. That number is tiny. It's the force of a piece of paper resting on your hand. But sustained over millions of miles, it's not a drift. It's an engine. Thorne didn't publish his findings immediately. He did what any good scientist does: he asked for a second opinion. He sent the dataset to a colleague at the Max Planck Institute in Germany. The reply came back 4 hours later. It was just 2 words: "Is this real?" This was the first anomaly: silent propulsion. The object was pushing itself. It was adding energy to its orbit without shedding mass. There are only a few theoretical ways to do this. One is a solar sail, using the pressure of sunlight to push a giant, thin mirror. Another is a magnetic field drive, pushing against the solar wind itself. Both of those are technologies. Neither of those are rocks. While the orbital dynamicists were losing their minds over the speed, the optical astronomers were facing their own nightmare. This was the light curve crisis. As I mentioned, the light curve is the heartbeat of an asteroid. It tells us how the object is spinning. A normal asteroid is a tumbling mess. It spins on 3 axes, it wobbles. Its brightness goes up, down in a chaotic but repeatable pattern. For the first week of observation, 3I Atlas looked like a normal tumbler. Its brightness varied by a factor of 10, suggesting it was long and skinny, cigar-shaped, like Oumuamua. But then, on October 14th, the heartbeat stopped. The light curve didn't just change, it flattened. The object went from a chaotic tumble to a perfect, steady shine. Let's think about the physics of that. Imagine you throw a hammer in space. It spins. It will spin forever until something stops it. To stop a spinning object the size of a city block requires force. You need thrusters firing in the opposite direction. You need to kill the momentum. 3I Atlas stabilized itself in less than 6 hours. The amount of torque required to do that is astronomical. If it were a natural rock, the stress of stopping that spin so quickly would have ripped it apart. It would have shattered into a million pieces of gravel. But it didn't shatter. It stabilized. And then it oriented itself. Based on the reflection data, we know that after it stopped spinning, it pointed one specific face toward the sun. It locked on. This is called tidal locking, when a moon does it to a planet over millions of years. But 3I Atlas did it in an afternoon. Why? Why point one face at the sun? The engineers at the European Space Agency, ESA, had a theory. They called it the shield hypothesis. If the object is artificial, and if it has sensitive sensors or a biological crew, it needs to protect them from solar radiation. By pointing a thick, shielded side at the sun, it creates a shadow behind it. A cool zone. The data supported this. The front of the object, the side facing the sun, was reflecting 95% of the light. It was acting like a mirror. The back of the object was pitch black. It was radiating almost no heat. This brings us to the spectral impossibility. We know what things in space are made of by looking at the light they reflect. We call this spectroscopy. Every element has a barcode. Hydrogen looks one way, carbon looks another. Iron looks different from silicon. When the Gemini North Telescope in Hawaii trained its spectrograph on 3I Atlas, the readout was baffling. It didn't look like rock silicates. It didn't look like metal, iron, nickel. It looked like nothing. The spectrum was flat. It had no absorption lines. In optics, we call this a continuum. It means the object isn't absorbing any specific color of light, it's reflecting all of them perfectly. A perfect mirror. Dr. Sarah Millman, also a pseudonym, a materials scientist who consulted for NASA on the OSIRIS-RX mission, saw the leaked spectral charts. She allegedly told her team, "Nature doesn't make flat spectrums. Even pure ice has absorption bands. Even polished gold has a tint. The only thing that has a flat spectrum is a synthetic metamaterial designed to be invisible to radar." That was the phrase that woke up the Pentagon. On November 12th, the U.S. Space Force used their ground-based radar systems to ping 3I Atlas. They blasted it with radio waves, expecting to see a bounce back that would give them a precise shape. They got nothing. The radar waves hit the object and vanished. They weren't reflected back to Earth. They were either absorbed stealth technology or deflected away at an angle scattering technology. For a rock to be stealthy is impossible. A rock is a dumb reflector. It bounces radar everywhere. For an object to be stealthy, it has to be shaped specifically to scatter waves. It needs sharp angles. It needs radiation-absorbent coating. The Frigga non-interaction was the final nail in the coffin of the natural object theory. As 3I Atlas moved through the asteroid belt, it passed dangerously close to a known asteroid named 77 Frigga. This was a clean experiment set up by the cosmos. We know exactly how massive Frigga is. We know its orbit perfectly. If 3I Atlas had mass, if it was a big heavy rock, its gravity should have tugged on Frigga. Just a tiny bit. A micro-wobble, astronomers watched, they waited. 77 Frigga didn't budge, not a millimeter. This terrified the analysts, because it implied one of two things and both were nightmares. One, the hollow shell theory. 3I Atlas has almost no mass. It's a giant balloon, a hollow sphere 2 kilometers wide, but with walls as thin as foil. Two, the gravity masking theory. The object has technology that manipulates or dampens its own gravitational footprint. Option 1 suggests an alien light sail or a discarded fuel tank. Option 2 suggests technology 1,000 years ahead of ours. It was around this time that the Harvard Whisperers began their private panic. Who are the Harvard Whisperers? They are an informal group of senior astrophysicists, cosmologists, and theoretical physicists from the Ivy League, Harvard, Princeton, MIT. These are the people who usually write the textbooks. They don't indulge in conspiracy theories. But in late November, their private email chains, some of which have since been leaked or described by whistleblowers, shifted tone completely. One email, dated November 18th, from a senior chair at the Harvard Center for Astrophysics, read, "The density calculations are irrefutable. If we stick to the standard model, the object does not exist. It is a mathematical phantom. We are looking at a construct. The question is no longer, what is it? The question is it occupied?" Another email, a response from a colleague at MIT, was even more blunt. "We need to consider the von Neumann probe hypothesis immediately. If this is a self-replicating machine, its behavior at perihelion will be the key. It will not just swing around the sun. It will recharge. We need to alert the DNI, Director of National Intelligence, before the public data confirms this." This is the living hypothesis taking root. The idea that 3I Atlas wasn't just a ship, it was an automaton, a probe sent out by a civilization to map, mine, or monitor the galaxy. The wounded bird theory also emerged here. Some scientists argued that the erratic behavior, the tumbling, the sudden stabilization, the weird jamming signals, suggested the probe was damaged. It had been drifting for millions of years, dormant, but as it got closer to our sun, the solar energy woke it up. It was running a boot-up sequence. Step 1, stabilize rotation, check. Step 2, orient solar collectors, check. Step 3, engage propulsion, check. Step 4, establish communication. And that brings us to the most unsettling anomaly of all, the pulse. I mentioned the radio interference earlier, but let's look at the specifics. The signal wasn't random static. It was pulsing at 1/618 gigahertz. Why does that number matter? 1/618 is the golden ratio, phi. It's a mathematical constant found in nature, in spiral galaxies, in seashells, in DNA. But it is not found in the radio spectrum of stars. Stars emit chaos. They emit noise. To emit a pure tone at exactly the golden ratio requires a transmitter. It requires a digital synthesizer. The signal was detected by the Green Bank telescope in West Virginia. The operator thought it was a prank, someone hacking the feed, but the source was triangulation locked to the coordinates of 3I Atlas. The signal wasn't a message we could decode. It wasn't "take me to your leader." It was a beacon. It was a handshake protocol. Think about your Wi-Fi router. When you turn it on, it blinks. It sends out a signal saying, "I am here, I am active." That is what 3I Atlas was doing. It was pinging the network. But what network? Was it calling home? Or was it talking to something else that is already here? That thought sent chills down the spines of the intelligence community. If 3I Atlas is the visitor, is there a resident lurking in our solar system that we don't know about? As November turned to December, the anomaly became undeniable. The object was speeding up, stabilizing, hiding from radar, and broadcasting a mathematical constant. The media was still running stories about the Christmas comet. They were telling you to get your binoculars ready for a once-in-a-lifetime show. But in the Situation Room at the White House, the briefing binders were labeled Event Horizon. They knew that 3I Atlas was about to pass behind the sun. They knew this was the critical moment. If the wounded bird theory was right, the probe would use the sun's energy to fully repair itself. It would emerge from the other side not as a piece of debris, but as a fully functional starship. And they knew they couldn't let you see that happen. The decision to cut the feeds, the data blackout we will cover in the next section, wasn't made on a whim. It was the direct result of the anomalies in Section 2. They looked at the acceleration. They looked at the radar cross-section. They looked at the golden ratio signal. And they realized that the next thing this object did might be an act of war or an act of communication. Either way, they wanted to be the first to know. So, as 3I Atlas dove toward the solar inferno, the scientists stopped being scientists and started being secret keepers. They stopped updating the public servers. They stopped answering emails from journalists. They signed the non-disclosure agreements because the anomaly had manifested. The ghost was real, and it was hungry. The comet was dead. Long live the machine. Section 3. The silence. There's a concept in intelligence operations called the void. It's the moment when a target goes into a tunnel, or a submarine dives deep below the thermocline, or a plane switches off its transponder over the ocean. It is the moment you lose contact. And in that moment, your imagination becomes your worst enemy. Because in the void, anything can happen. And usually, the things that happen in the dark are the things you were never meant to see. For the scientific community tracking 3I Atlas, and for the rest of the world, whether they knew it or not, the void began on December 2nd. This was the date of perihelion, the point of closest approach, the moment the object would skim the surface of our star, subjected to temperatures of thousands of degrees and gravity strong enough to tear a planet apart. In a normal timeline, this would be the Super Bowl of astronomy. Every telescope capable of pointing near the sun would be recording. We have an entire fleet of spacecraft designed specifically for this. We have SOHO, the Solar and Heliospheric Observatory, a veteran satellite that has been watching the sun since the 1990s. We have StereoWay, which orbits ahead of Earth to give us a 3D view. We have the Solar Dynamics Observatory, SDO, which streams 4K video of the sun 24 hours a day. These machines are the eyes of humanity. They are robust. They are redundant. They are designed to never blink. But on December 2nd at exactly 8:42 UTC, just as 3I Atlas was crossing the solar limb, they all blinked at once. It started with SOHO. The LASCO C3 coronagraph is the camera that looks at the space around the sun. It acts like a hand blocking the sun's glare so you can see the stars and comets around it. Amateur comet hunters refresh its feed every 20 minutes. At 08:40, the feed showed the sun, the background stars, and the tiny, defiant pixel of 3I Atlas creeping toward the edge of the occulting disk. At 08:42, the feed froze. A static image remained on the screen. The timestamp stopped updating. Users hit refresh. Nothing, just the spinning wheel of death. 5 minutes later, the official NASA SOHO website displayed a banner. Data access temporarily unavailable due to scheduled server maintenance. Scheduled, let's pause on that word. Scheduled. You do not schedule maintenance during the most critical astronomical event of the year. You do not take your eyes off the road when you are driving 100 miles per hour. If this was maintenance, it was the most incompetent timing in the history of spaceflight. It would be like NBC cutting to a test pattern during the final seconds of the Super Bowl. But it wasn't incompetence. It was coordination. Because 10 minutes after SOHO went dark, the Solar Dynamics Observatory, SDO, went into safe mode. SDO is a billion-dollar satellite. It doesn't just decide to take a nap. Safe mode is a protective state triggered by a major anomaly or a direct command from the ground. NASA claimed it was a reaction wheel saturation issue, a mechanical hiccup, a coincidence. So now, 2 of our 3 eyes were blind. The amateur community panicked. They rushed to the third source. StereoWay, this spacecraft is millions of miles away from the others. It runs on different hardware, different software, and communicates through a different ground station. If SOHO and SDO went down, Stereo was the backup. It was the fail-safe. It was the one thing that couldn't be stopped. At 09:15 UTC, the stereo feed cut to black. No error message. No maintenance banner. Just a black screen. The statistical probability of 3 independent, redundant, government-run observatory platforms suffering catastrophic failure within 45 minutes of each other is 0. It is not low. It is 0. If you work in IT, you know this. If 3 separate servers in 3 separate data centers crash at the same time, it's not a bug. It's a pulled plug. For 4 days, the world was blind. 3I Atlas was alone in the fire. During those 4 days, the internet was a war zone of speculation. On Reddit, Twitter, and the specialized astronomy forums, people were screaming. They knew this wasn't a coincidence. They were posting archive footage, analyzing the last frames before the blackout, trying to see if there was a solar flare or a CME, coronal mass ejection, that could explain the outage. There was nothing. The sun was quiet. The weather in space was clear. So, what were they hiding? We now have part of the answer, thanks to a leak from the Goldstone Deep Space Communications Complex in the Mojave Desert. Goldstone is one of the 3 ears of NASA's Deep Space Network. It listens to our spacecraft. It receives the ones and zeros that become the pictures we see on the news. A technician who was on shift during the blackout released a partial log file to an encrypted drop site. The log doesn't show pictures. It shows bandwidth. It shows that while the public websites were down, the download rate from Soho and Stereo was maxed out. The satellites weren't broken. They were transmitting. They were sending gigabytes of data back to Earth. But that data wasn't going to the public web servers. It was being routed to a secure node. It was being rerouted to an IP address block associated with the National Reconnaissance Office, NRO. They were watching. They just weren't letting us watch. What did they see? What was so dangerous that they had to break the public trust to hide it? We can construct a picture based on the physics of the living hypothesis we discussed in Section 2. If 3I Atlas is a probe, and if it was feeding, then perihelion wasn't a flyby. It was a pit stop. The sun is a giant fusion reactor. It emits incredible amounts of energy, electromagnetic, thermal, kinetic. A sufficiently advanced civilization wouldn't bring fuel with them between the stars. That's inefficient. They would use the stars themselves as gas stations. We believe that during the 96 hours of silence, 3I Atlas deployed something. Maybe it opened its solar sails to their full extent, spanning kilometers to catch the photon wind. Maybe it extended magnetic scoops to harvest plasma from the solar corona. Maybe it simply bathed in the radiation to recharge its batteries, soaking up the kind of power that could run a city for 1,000 years. Whatever it did, it was violent. On December 4th, day 2 of the blackout, ground-based magnetometers in Scandinavia detected a geomagnetic jerk. This is usually caused by a solar storm hitting Earth, but there was no solar storm. Something disturbed the sun's magnetic field locally. Something poked the bear. Imagine a mosquito landing on an elephant. It doesn't matter. Now imagine a mosquito that weighs as much as a tank. That does matter. 3I Atlas, despite being small, interacted with the sun in a way that sent a ripple through the magnetic field lines all the way to Earth. This suggests the object was using high-energy electromagnetic fields. It was pushing against the sun. And while the public stared at maintenance screens, the military was moving. This is the part of the story that moves from science mystery to Tom Clancy thriller. But the flight logs don't lie. Flight tracking software, like Flight Radar 24, showed a massive spike in activity around Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and Cheyenne Mountain during the blackout. These are the nerve centers of U.S. aerospace defense. High-altitude observational aircraft, the WB-57s that NASA uses to chase eclipses, were scrambled. They launched from Houston and flew strange, loitering patterns over the Pacific Ocean. Why? To get above the clouds. To get a clear view of the sun with their own infrared cameras, independent of the broken satellites. They were looking for something. They were terrified of missing the moment. And then there was the silence of the people. Usually, when a satellite breaks, the principal investigators, the lead scientists, are on Twitter immediately. They are complaining, explaining, giving updates. Hey guys, gyro failed, working on a fix. They want you to know they are doing their job. This time, radio silence. The Twitter accounts of the Soho and Stereo project leads haven't posted since December 1st. Not a word, no happy holidays. No, we're back. Nothing. It's as if they were told to put their phones in a bag and step away from the keyboard. This is the soft censorship. It's not men in black deleting your tweets. It's a memo from the Department of Defense reminding you that your funding comes from a federal grant and that national security protocols are now in effect. It's the threat of losing your career if you speak out of turn. So the scientists sat on their hands. The satellites streamed their secret data to the Pentagon, and the world waited. The psychological toll of this silence cannot be overstated. For those of us who knew what was happening, those 4 days felt like 4 years. We were waiting for the all clear. We were waiting for the object to disintegrate. We were hoping to see a cloud of dust emerge from the other side of the sun. That would mean we were wrong. That would mean it was just a comet and the heat destroyed it. We could go back to our normal lives. We could laugh about how paranoid we were. But deep down, we knew. We knew because of the golden ratio signal. We knew because of the Frigga non-interaction. We knew because you don't censor a dead rock. On December 6th, the blackout ended as abruptly as it began. The websites came back online. The maintenance banners disappeared. The data feeds resumed. But there was a gap. If you go to the Soho archives right now, you will see a missing block of data. December 2nd to December 6th is just gone. There are no images. There is no telemetry. The official explanation is data corruption during transmission. They wiped the tape, but they couldn't wipe the sky. As the cameras came back online, astronomers rushed to the live feed to see if 3I Atlas had survived. They scanned the exit trajectory. They looked for the telltale smear of a disintegrated comet. They didn't find a smear. They found a spotlight. 3I Atlas emerged from behind the sun, but it wasn't the same object that went in. Before the sun, it was a dark, metallic sliver, reflecting 95% of light but still small. After the sun, it was glowing. It wasn't just reflecting light anymore, it was emitting it. In the infrared spectrum, it was hot. White hot. It had absorbed a massive thermal load, and instead of melting, it was holding onto it, containing it, and the trajectory. This is the reveal that made the blood run cold in the veins of the orbital analysts. Before the blackout, 3I Atlas was on an escape trajectory. It was supposed to sling around the sun and head back out to the stars, goodbye forever. It was supposed to be a visitor. But when it re-emerged, it had slowed down. It had performed a propulsive braking maneuver inside the sun's corona. It used the chaos of the solar atmosphere to hide the burn. It fired its engines, or deployed its drag chutes, or used its magnetic sails while it was hidden from view. It shed velocity, massive amounts of it. It killed its escape speed. It was no longer an interstellar voyager. It was a captured satellite. It had successfully inserted itself into a highly elliptical orbit around our sun. The traveler had unpacked its bags. It was moving into the guest room. The silence of the last 4 days wasn't a technical glitch. It was a curtain drawn across a stage so the actors could change their costumes. The media didn't report this. CNN ran a story about a celebrity scandal. The BBC talked about the weather. The science blogs copy-pasted the NASA press release about successful sensor calibration. Nobody mentioned that we had just acquired a new moon. Nobody mentioned that an alien artifact had just parked itself in our driveway. The silence was over, but the lie had just begun, because now the object wasn't just a mysterious dot on a screen. It was on a return loop. The math was simple. It wasn't leaving. It was coming back around. And this time, it wasn't coming for the sun. It was coming for Earth. The pattern of denial, Section 1, was about ignoring the problem. The anomaly manifests, Section 2, was about realizing the problem. The silence, Section 3, was about the authorities realizing they couldn't stop it, so they had to hide it. But you can't hide a burning starship forever. In the next section, we are going to talk about escalation. We are going to talk about what happened when the object started talking back. We are going to talk about the terrifying realization that 3I Atlas isn't just a probe. It's a seed, and it's beginning to bloom. The scientific community is no longer debating if it's artificial. The debate has shifted to intent. Is it hostile? Is it indifferent? Or is it simply a machine following a program laid down 1 million years ago, a program that doesn't care if we are in the way? The silence bought the government's time. It bought them 4 days to run their simulations, to brief their generals, to move their assets. But it didn't buy them a solution, because 3I Atlas is still there. It's brighter than ever. It's closer than ever. And every second that ticks by, it gathers more energy, waiting for the signal to execute the next line of its code. The silence has ended. The countdown has begun. Section 4, Escalation. If the previous sections were about the slow, creeping dread of the unknown, the shadow moving behind the curtain, Section 4 is about the sudden, violent shock of the known. It is the moment in the horror movie where the monster stops hiding in the basement and steps onto the front porch. It is the moment where theory ends and threat begins. The silence ended on December 6th. The escalation began on December 7th. When 3I Atlas emerged from behind the sun, the data didn't just trickle in, it flooded. And the first thing that drowned in that flood was the comet hypothesis. For months, the skeptics had clung to the idea that this was a natural object. They had built their entire careers on it. They had gone on television, written op-eds, and tweeted snarky comments about tinfoil hat conspiracy theorists. They had bet their tenures, their grants, and their reputations that 3I Atlas was just a rock. On the morning of December 7th, those bets were called in, and everyone lost. The first sign that the situation had escalated out of control came from the Minor Planet Center, MPC. As we've discussed, the MPC is the global database of record for everything in the solar system. When they update an orbit, it isn't a suggestion. It is the law. Usually, an orbit update is a minor tweak. You adjust a decimal point here or there because of a new observation. You refine the error bars. But when the new TLE, two-line element, set for 3I Atlas was released at 4 UTC, it didn't look like an update. It looked like a typo. It looked like someone had fallen asleep on the keyboard. The eccentricity of the orbit had dropped from 12 to 09. Now, I know that sounds like dry math, so let me explain exactly what that means in plain English, because it is the most terrifying number you will ever hear. In celestial mechanics, eccentricity tells you the shape of an orbit. If the number is 0, it's a perfect circle, like Earth. If the number is between 0 and 1, it's an ellipse, like a normal comet. If the number is greater than 1, it's a hyperbola. This means the object is going so fast that the sun's gravity cannot hold it. It is an escape trajectory. It is leaving the solar system forever. For the entire year, 3I Atlas had an eccentricity of 12. It was a visitor. It was just passing through. It was supposed to swing around the sun and shoot back out into the dark, never to be seen again. But on December 7th, that number dropped to 0. 9. 3I Atlas had hit the brakes. It hadn't just slowed down a little bit. It had shed 15 kilometers per second of velocity in a matter of hours. In the world of physics, that is impossible for a rock. You cannot shed that much speed without hitting something. You have to slam into a gas cloud, or a planet, or a dense field of dust to lose that much momentum. 3I Atlas didn't hit anything. Space is empty. It didn't hit a wall, it hit a button. It engaged a propulsion system capable of generating prolonged, high-thrust deceleration. It fired an engine. The panic inside the scientific community was immediate, visceral, and absolute. I spoke to a source at the European Space Operations Center, ESOC, in Darmstadt, Germany. He described the atmosphere in the flight dynamics room that morning. It was dead silent, he told me. Usually, the room is buzzing with chatter. But that morning, people were just staring at their screens. One of the senior analysts, a guy who has tracked comets for 30 years, a guy who doesn't believe in anything unless he can put it on a spreadsheet, just stood up. He took off his glasses, cleaned them very slowly, put them back on, and said, "That's not celestial mechanics, that's a pilot." And then he walked out of the room. That's a pilot, that phrase should haunt you, because a pilot has intent. A pilot has a will. A pilot has a destination. And that brings us to the second escalation, the intercept course. When you plot the new elliptical orbit of 3I Atlas, it doesn't just loop around the sun randomly. It isn't just drifting. It intersects with something. It creates a node, a crossing point. Care to guess where that crossing point is? It intersects the orbital plane of Earth. Specifically, it intersects Earth's orbit at a point we will reach in exactly 160 days. This is not a close approach. This is not a flyby. This is an intercept course. The object didn't just stop leaving. It decided to visit. It calculated where we would be, and it adjusted its speed to meet us there. This revelation shattered the mockers. You know the ones I'm talking about. The pop science celebrities who had spent the last year telling you that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Well, here was the evidence. It was written in the sky in giant, burning letters. We saw a sudden, coordinated shift in the media narrative. The soft disclosure began. The powers that be knew they couldn't keep the comet lie going, so they started pivoting to a new story. They needed to prepare the public psyche without causing a total collapse of society. On December 9th, the New York Times ran a piece titled "The Importance of Near-Earth Object Preparedness." It was buried in the science section, but the tone was urgent. On December 10th, the Washington Post published an op-ed by a former general titled, "Why NASA Needs More Funding for Planetary Shielding." On December 11th, CNN hosted a panel discussion on the hypothetical protocols for first contact. They didn't mention 3I Atlas by name in the headlines. They didn't want to start a stampede, but they were priming the pump. They were planting the seeds of fear. They were getting you ready for the news that is coming. They were soft-launching the apocalypse. But the escalation wasn't just orbital or political. It was physical. 3I Atlas itself had changed. Before the sun, it was a dark, flat, tumbling object. It was a sliver of stealth material. After the sun, it was unfolding. High-resolution radar images captured by the Goldstone Solar System radar, which was back online, but operating under strict secrecy with armed guards at the server racks, showed that the object's cross-section had grown. It had expanded. It wasn't a single solid rock anymore. It looked like a flower opening up, or a claw. The radar returns showed 5 distinct lobes extending from a central core. These lobes were thin, metallic, and enormous, each one nearly a kilometer long. The scientists who saw this data didn't call them lobes, they called them radiators. This is a crucial technical detail. If you have a high-powered machine, a nuclear reactor, a supercomputer, an antimatter engine, you generate heat. Massive amounts of heat. In space, getting rid of heat is really, really hard because there is no air to cool you down. You can't use a fan. You have to radiate the heat away as infrared light using giant panels. The fact that 3I Atlas deployed 5 massive radiators suggests that it turned something on. Something hot. Something powerful. What does a probe turn on after it refuels at a star? It turns on its sensors. It turns on its comms. It turns on its drive. And that brings us to the signal escalation. Remember the golden ratio, pulse from Section 2? The 1. 618 gigahertz ping? That was a whisper. That was a hello. That was the doorbell. Now the object is screaming. The SETI Institute, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, has been monitoring the object since the beginning, usually with deep skepticism. They are the ones who always say, it's never aliens. But on December 12th, the Allen Telescope Array in California detected a new signal coming from 3I Atlas. This wasn't a simple pulse. It was a data stream. It was a complex, modulated signal broadcast in the X-band, the same frequency range used by military communications satellites. The bandwidth was massive. We're talking terabytes of data being blasted out every second. But here is the terrifying part. The signal wasn't aimed at Earth. It was aimed away from us. It was aimed back toward the constellation Lyra. The same direction 3I Atlas came from. It was phoning home. It was sending a report. I have arrived. I am refueling, proceeding to target. The decryption teams at the NSA are undoubtedly working on that signal right now. They are running it through supercomputers, looking for patterns, looking for syntax. But you don't need to read the email to know what it says. You just need to look at the behavior of the sender. The sender is aggressive. On December 14th, a commercial satellite, Starlink 3122, suffered a catastrophic failure while passing over the region of the sky where 3I Atlas was located. SpaceX called it a random electronics failure. They said it was a micrometeoroid impact, but insider reports suggest the satellite was fried. Its sensors were overloaded by a directed burst of energy. Its solar panels were scorched. Was it an attack? Did the probe see the satellite as a threat? Or did the satellite just get in the way of the beam 3I Atlas was firing back to Lyra? We don't know. But we know that the U.S. Space Force immediately rerouted all other assets away from that sector. They created a no-fly zone in orbit. Think about that. We have a no-fly zone in our own sky because we are afraid of a rock. The military escalation on the ground has matched the escalation in the sky. In the last 2 weeks, residents near Vandenberg Space Force Base in California have reported a surge in launches. Unscheduled launches. Rockets going up in the middle of the night with no payload manifests and no press releases. What are they launching? The official schedule says nothing. The sky says otherwise. Are they sensor platforms? Are they kinetic impactors, missiles designed to hit asteroids? Or are they something else? There are rumors, and I stress, these are rumors, but they come from credible sources within the aerospace contractor world, that the U.S. government is deploying Project Hammer. Project Hammer was a Cold War concept, a break glass in case of emergency plan. The idea was to put nuclear weapons in orbit to defend against asteroid impacts. It was illegal. It violated the Outer Space Treaty of 1967. It was never built, or so we thought. If they are launching Hammer now, it means they have accepted the hostile intent theory. It means they aren't trying to study 3I Atlas anymore. They are trying to kill it. But how do you kill something that eats solar flares for breakfast? How do you kill something that can change its orbit at will? How do you hit a target that has already proven it can jam your radar and ghost your sensors? The escalation has moved beyond science. It has moved beyond politics. It is now existential. The public is starting to smell the smoke. You can see it in the trends. 3I Atlas is trending on Twitter, not because of NASA, but because of leaked videos from amateur astronomers. One video in particular, filmed by a teenager in Arizona with a modified Dobsonian telescope, went viral on TikTok before being scrubbed. It showed 3I Atlas not as a dot, but as a flaring cross. A pulsing light. The caption read, "It's blinking at us. People are noticing that the moon looks different." Because when the object is at the right angle, its reflection casts a faint, secondary glow. They are noticing the silence of the experts. They are noticing the soft preparedness warnings. The CDC updated its emergency preparedness page on December 15th. They added a new section on long-term grid outages and atmospheric debris. They told people to have 2 weeks of water. FEMA has quietly moved its regional command centers to Level 3 readiness, the level usually reserved for approaching hurricanes. But there is no hurricane. There is no earthquake. The weather is fine. The government knows that the secret is about to expire. They can't hide a glowing, shape-shifting, signal-blasting alien ship forever. They are running out of time. And 3I Atlas knows it too. The object is accelerating again. But this time, it's not using the sun's gravity. It's using its own power. It is closing the distance to Earth faster than any natural object should. The intercept date, that 160-day countdown I mentioned, it's shrinking. The object is pushing harder. It wants to get here sooner. Why the rush? Maybe it knows we are preparing. Maybe it detects the radar locks from our missile defense systems. Maybe it sees the hammer, launches, and recognizes them as weapons. Or maybe it just has a schedule to keep. Maybe the signal it sent back to Lyra said, "Prep complete. Harvesting begins in T-150 days. The escalation is complete. The anomaly is a threat. The silence is a cover-up. And the visitor is an invader." We are now in the final phase, the confrontation. In the next section, the living hypothesis, we are going to dive deep into the specific biology or technology of the entity itself. We are going to ask the question, is there a crew? Is it an AI? Or is the ship itself alive? We are going to look at the von Neumann nightmare scenario. The idea that 3I Atlas isn't here to conquer us. It's here to replicate. It's here to turn our solar system into a factory for more of itself. And Earth is just raw materials. The escalation has brought us to the edge of the cliff. Now we have to look down. Section 5. The living hypothesis. We have established that 3I Atlas is not a rock. We have established that it is under intelligent control. But now, we must confront the question that has turned the world's most rational scientists into insomniacs, pacing their offices at 3 a.m., staring at screens they wish they could unsee. The question is not who sent it. The question is, what is inside? Is it a vessel? A hollow shell carrying a crew of biological astronauts, freezing in cryosleep as they cross the void? Is it an artificial intelligence? A cold, calculating supercomputer housed in a diamond-hard chassis, running a mission profile set thousands of years ago? Or is it something else? Something we don't even have a vocabulary for yet. This brings us to the living hypothesis. And frankly, of all the scenarios being debated in the frantic, locked-door meetings at the Pentagon and the European Space Agency, this is the one that is the most disturbing. Because if the leading theories are correct, we aren't dealing with a visitor. We are dealing with an infection. Let's dismantle the two main competing theories that have emerged since the escalation phase. The von Neumann probe, the machine, and the macrobiological entity, the beast. Part 1, the von Neumann nightmare. John von Neumann was a Hungarian-American mathematician in the mid-20th century who proposed a concept that sounded like science fiction, but was mathematically inevitable. He described a self-replicating spacecraft. The logic goes like this: space is too big for a biological species to explore. We live too short and the distances are too vast. So you don't send people, you send a machine. You send one probe to a neighboring star system. That probe is programmed to do 3 things: 1, survey, map the system; 2, harvest, mine asteroids for metal, suck up gas giants for fuel, and capture solar energy. 3. Replicate, use those raw materials to build copies of itself. Once the copies are built, they fly off to the next stars to do the same thing. One probe becomes 2, 2 become 4, 4 become 8. It is an exponential explosion. A mechanical virus that eats galaxies. For decades, this was just a terrifying thought experiment. A mathematical ghost story. But 3I Atlas is ticking every single box on the von Neumann checklist. 1. Arrival, survey. It entered our system on a low-energy trajectory, ideal for scanning the planets as it passed. It didn't rush through, it drifted. It was watching. 2. Refueling, harvest. This is the blackout event from Section 3. Why did it dive into the sun? Not just for a gravity assist, it dove into the corona to harvest energy. The flatline in the solar observatories wasn't a glitch, it was a drain. The probe was drinking from the fire hose. 3. Deployment, replication. This is the phase we are in now. And this is why the military is panicking. On December 18th, the Keck Observatory in Hawaii, using its adaptive optics system to peer through the atmospheric turbulence, spotted something trailing behind 3I Atlas. At first, the astronomers thought the object was breaking up. They thought, finally, the heat stress from the perihelion cracked it, it's disintegrating. But debris doesn't fly in formation. The fragments weren't drifting away into the dark. They were holding station. There are now 4 distinct smaller objects tracking the main body of 3I Atlas. They are perfectly spaced, forming a diamond pattern behind the mothership. These aren't rocks, they are drones. It appears that 3I Atlas possesses onboard manufacturing capabilities. It used the material it harvested, perhaps stripping atoms from the solar wind or mining the dust of the zodiacal cloud, to 3D print copies of itself. Or perhaps they were docked inside it all along, like nesting dolls, and the energy from the sun was the key to unlocking them. This changes the threat level from one big ship to swarm. If these drones are capable of independent flight, the tactical situation changes instantly. A single ship can be tracked, a single ship can be targeted, but a swarm can surround the Earth. A swarm can target our entire satellite grid simultaneously. A swarm can be in London, New York, Tokyo, and Moscow at the same time. We are seeing the beginning of an exponential growth curve. If 3I Atlas can build 4 drones in 2 weeks, how many can it build in 6 months? By the time it reaches Earth, will we be facing 5 ships, or 5,000? Part 2. The biological entity theory. But there is a competing theory. One that is even stranger, supported by a faction of astrobiologists who have been analyzing the spectral data with growing horror. The biosynthetic theory. This theory comes from a leaked report allegedly authored by a team at the University of Cambridge's Department of Zoology, of all places. Why zoology? Because the behavior of 3I Atlas doesn't look like engineering. It looks like biology. The report analyzes the flat spectrum we discussed, the way the object reflects light perfectly. The Cambridge team argues that this isn't a metallic hull, it's a skin. Specifically, they compare it to the chromatophores found in cephalopods, squid, and octopuses. These are cells that can change color and reflectivity instantly. Squid use them to camouflage or to communicate. They can turn their skin into a mirror to hide in the open ocean. The report points to the healing behavior. Remember the amateur astronomer who saw the object flaring? The machine theorists called it an engine burn. The bio-theorists call it a metabolic reaction. They suggest the object was damaged, perhaps by a micrometeoroid or perhaps by the intensity of the sun, and the flare was the creature repairing itself, sealing the wound. Metal doesn't heal, tissue does, and then there is the shape shifting. When the Starlink satellite allegedly collided with the object's beam, radar cross-sections showed 3I Atlas changing its geometry. It didn't just rotate. It morphed. The radiators, the petals flexed. Rigid mechanical structures have hinges, they have joints, they move in straight lines. 3I Atlas moved with fluidity. It rippled. If 3I Atlas is alive, a giant spacefaring organism, then we have to rethink everything we know about life. We assume life needs a planet. We assume life needs water and air. But what if life can evolve in the vacuum? We know about extremophiles on Earth. bacteria that live in nuclear reactors, or inside boiling acid vents. Is it so impossible to imagine an extremophile, the size of a mountain that lives in the hard vacuum between stars? If it is an animal, what motivates it? An animal follows instinct: 1, survival; 2, reproduction; 3, feeding. And this brings us to the most terrifying implication of the living hypothesis: the diet. What does a creature the size of a city eat? It doesn't eat plankton, it doesn't eat grass, it eats energy. It eats radiation, it eats electricity. And looking at the Earth from space, what do we look like? We are the brightest, loudest, tastiest electrical signal in the dark. We are leaking radio waves, TV signals, radar pulses, and 5G chatter into space 24 hours a day. We have turned our planet into a glowing beacon of electromagnetic energy. To a creature that feeds on energy, Earth isn't a civilization. It's a buffet. This aligns with the pulse we detected, the golden ratio signal 1/618 gigahertz. In nature, predators use signals to coordinate. Wolves howl to gather the pack. Bats screech to locate prey. Whales sing across oceans to find mates. Is the 1/618 gigahertz signal a hunting cry? Is it calling the rest of the species? We dug deep into the archives of the SETI Institute to see if this specific frequency had ever been heard before. And what we found sent a shiver down our spines. In 2011, a brief, unexplained burst of radio waves was detected from the direction of the Kepler-22b star system. It was dismissed as a glitch, but the frequency, 1/618 gigahertz. In 1977, the famous WOW signal, the strongest candidate for alien contact ever found. The frequency was different, 1420 megahertz, the hydrogen line, but the modulation pattern, the rise and fall of the signal strength, it matches the 3I Atlas signal perfectly. This implies that 3I Atlas isn't the first one. It implies they have been here before, or at least they have been scanning us for a long time. Perhaps they wait. Perhaps they are like locusts. They wait for a civilization to get loud enough, to generate enough power, to be worth harvesting. In 1977, we were just starting to broadcast globally. Now, we are a digital planet. We are ripe. Part 3. The psychology of the entity. The military profilers at the Pentagon, the people who usually model the behavior of rogue states or terrorist cells, are now trying to model the psychology of a non-human intelligence. NHI. They are running game theory simulations. The results are bleak. If it is a probe machine, goal, efficiency. Next move, it will secure the high ground Earth orbit. It will systematically dismantle any threats, satellites, nuclear missiles. It will begin its primary task: mining, observation, or sterilization. Negotiation, impossible. You cannot argue with a script. You cannot plead with a line of code. It has no pity, no anger, no fear. It just executes. If it is an entity, biological. Goal, resources, territory. Next move, it will look for food. It might drain our ionosphere, destroying our electronics. It might land in the oceans to harvest deuterium, heavy water. Negotiation, unlikely but theoretically possible. Can you negotiate with a shark? No, but you can scare it away. You can make yourself too painful to eat. This leads to the debate over Project Hammer, the nuclear option. The hawks in the Situation Room, represented by the US, Russia, and China, argue that we must strike before it establishes orbit. They want to use nuclear-tipped interceptors. They believe that if it's a machine, the EMP from a nuke will fry its circuits. If it's an animal, the blast will kill it. But the doves, represented by the scientific community and many European leaders, are screaming that this is suicide. Why? Because of the absorption risk. If 3I Atlas feeds on energy, if it feeds on radiation, then hitting it with a nuclear weapon might not kill it. It might feed it. We might be giving it exactly what it wants: a massive, concentrated burst of hard radiation. It could absorb the blast, grow stronger, and get angry. There is a historical precedent for this fear. In 1962, the US detonated a nuclear weapon in space, Starfish Prime. The EMP was vastly larger than predicted. It knocked out satellites and turned off streetlights in Hawaii 900 miles away. If we detonate a nuke near 3I Atlas and it reflects that energy back at us, it could wipe out our entire electrical grid instantly. We would be back in the Stone Age in a nanosecond, with an alien predator sitting in the sky above us and no way to fight back. Part 4. The net, but 3I Atlas isn't waiting for us to decide. It is moving. The 4 drones trailing the main object have begun to separate. They are executing a maneuver that any fighter pilot would recognize. The spread formation. Drone Alpha is moving high, above the ecliptic plane. Drone Beta is moving low. Drones Gamma and Delta are moving wide to the flanks. They are casting a net. This is a classic containment maneuver. It's what a SWAT team does when surrounding a building. It's what a pack of wolves does when surrounding a deer. They are cutting off the escape routes. They are boxing Earth in. By the time 3I Atlas reaches the intercept point in 150 days, the net will be closed. The drones will be positioned at the Lagrange points, stable gravitational spots around Earth. If we try to launch a ship then, we will have to fly through their blockade. The digestion field theory suggests that this formation isn't just tactical. It's functional. Some theorists believe the drones will generate a field, a magnetic containment bottle, around the Earth. And then the main body will begin to extract. Something, maybe it strips the ozone layer. Maybe it siphons off the magnetosphere. Maybe it harvests the bioelectric field of the biosphere itself. It sounds insane. It sounds like the plot of a bad comic book, but look at the data. Look at the flat spectrum. Look at the zero-gravity mass. Look at the formation flying. The universe is a dark forest, and something hungry has just stepped out of the trees. We have spent 50 years shouting into the void, asking, is anyone out there? We sent out the Voyager probes with gold records, playing Mozart and Chuck Berry, showing maps of where we live. We invited them in. We never stopped to think about what might hear us. We never stopped to think that the silence of the universe was there for a reason, that the quiet civilizations are the ones that survive and the loud ones are the ones that get eaten. Now the silence is broken, and the thing that broke it is bringing its children. The living hypothesis tells us we are prey. It tells us that our technology, our cities, our internet, everything we are proud of, is just the seasoning on the steak. The question is no longer, what is it? The question is, what does it want with us? And the answer might be as simple and as horrifying as biomass. In the next section, Section 6, the human response, we will look at what is happening on the ground. Not in the secret bunkers, but in your city, in your neighborhood. The leaks are starting to break containment. The soft disclosure is failing. The truth is spilling out onto TikTok and Twitter and the dark web. What happens when 8 billion people realize they are being hunted? What happens when the grocery stores empty out in an hour? What happens when the police stop showing up to work because they want to be home with their families? The real threat might not be the object in the sky. It might be what we do to each other while we wait for it to arrive. Panic, riots. The collapse of order. The living hypothesis tells us we are prey. Section 6 will tell us if we are predators too. Section 6, the human response. If the previous sections were about the science of the object, this section is about the sociology of the end. Because while we were looking up at the sky, we forgot to look around at each other. We always assumed that if aliens arrived, the world would unite. We watched movies like Independence Day, where humanity puts aside its differences to fight the common enemy. We were wrong. The arrival of 3I Atlas didn't bring us together. It tore us apart. The human response didn't happen all at once. It happened in waves. It started with a whisper, grew into a rumor, and finally exploded into a scream that drowned out every other sound on Earth. Phase 1, the leak, the bubble bursts. The government's plan was soft disclosure. They wanted to acclimate us slowly. A news story here, a leaked memo there. They wanted to manage the panic. But you cannot manage the internet. The dam broke on January 12th. The catalyst wasn't a press conference. It was a Discord server. A hacker group known as Voideye managed to breach the servers of a subcontractor for the European Space Agency. They didn't steal money. They stole a folder named 3I Atlas Spectral Analysis Final Confidential. They dumped the raw files onto 4chan, Reddit, and Telegram. Within hours, thousands of amateur data analysts, physics students, and engineers were tearing the files apart. They found the flat spectrum. They found the zero-gravity calculations. They found the drone deployment photos. But the smoking gun was a video file attached to the folder. It was a clip from the Soho satellite during the blackout. The footage the government said didn't exist. It showed 3I Atlas entering the solar corona. It showed the object pulsing. It showed arcs of electricity, solar lightning, connecting the probe to the sun. It looked like a mosquito sucking blood from a giant. The video went viral in minutes. It was viewed 100 million times before the censors could scrub it. 3I Atlas became the #1 trend globally. The government tried to claim it was a deepfake. They claimed it was AI-generated CGI. But then, the astronomers' revolt began. Scientists who had been silenced for months saw the leak and decided they had nothing left to lose. Dr. Alina Kay, a prominent radio astronomer in Chile, went on Instagram Live. She was crying. She held up her NDA non-disclosure agreement and ripped it in half. "It's real," she told her 5,000 followers. "Everything you're seeing is real. It's not a comet, it's a ship. And it's coming here. Don't go to work tomorrow, go be with your families." That clip was the match in the powder keg. Phase 2. The run supply chain collapse. The panic didn't look like the movies. There were no people running in the streets screaming. Not at first. It started at the grocery stores. Modern civilization runs on a just-in-time delivery system. Your local supermarket only has enough food on the shelves for 3 days. If the trucks stop coming, the food runs out. On the morning of January 13th, the panic buying algorithm triggered. It started with water, then canned goods, then batteries, then medicine. By noon, the shelves in major cities, New York, London, Mumbai, Tokyo, were bare. By 2:00 p.m., the fight started. People weren't fighting over TVs or iPhones. They were fighting over baby formula. They were fighting over the last bag of rice. Then came the bank run. People realized that if the world is ending, the numbers in their banking app are meaningless. They wanted cash. They wanted gold. The ATMs were drained in an hour. The banks locked their doors. This caused the first riots. Angry mobs smashed the windows of Chase and HSBC, demanding their money. But there was no money to give. The stock market crashed so hard the circuit breakers tripped instantly. Trading was suspended. But it didn't matter. The value of Apple and Amazon hit zero in the minds of the public. The only currency that mattered now was calories and ammunition. Phase 3. The crackdown martial law. The governments of the world had prepared for this. They had a plan called Continuity of Government, COG. On January 14th, the President of the United States, the Prime Minister of the UK, and the leaders of the EU declared a coordinated state of planetary emergency. They didn't call it martial law. They called it Civil Protection Protocols. But it was martial law. The National Guard was deployed to every major city. Tanks rolled down Fifth Avenue. Checkpoints were set up on the highways. Their orders were simple. 1. Protect critical infrastructure, power plants, water treatment, hospitals. 2. Stop the looting. 3. Keep the roads clear for military convoys. And this is where the asset seizure began. You see, to fight an alien threat, the military needs resources. They need fuel, they need metal, they need chips. Truckers were pulled over at gunpoint, and their cargo was commandeered for the war effort. Private generators were seized. Warehouses of food were locked down by soldiers, not to be distributed to the people, but to be hoarded for the bunkers. The internet began to fracture. The kill switch wasn't a total blackout that would cause too much panic. Instead, it was a throttle. Social media sites like Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook became unusable. Videos wouldn't load. Posts were pending review. The only news sources that worked were the official government broadcast channels. They tried to control the narrative. They told us, "The object is a concern, but we have a plan. Project Hammer is online. Stay in your homes. Ration your food. Trust the authorities." But nobody trusted them anymore. Phase 4. The fracture, psychological collapse. How does the human mind deal with the knowledge that it is no longer at the top of the food chain? It breaks. We saw the rise of 3 distinct psychological groups. 1. The deniers, the blue beamers. These people refused to believe 3I Atlas was real. They claimed it was a hologram, a government psyop. Project Blue Beam. They believed the government faked the alien threat to establish a new world order. They refused to hoard food. They marched in the streets without masks, shouting at the soldiers. Fate. When the reality hits, these are the first to die because they didn't prepare. To the fatalists, the party at the end of the world. These people accepted the end, and they decided to go out with a bang. They stopped going to work. They emptied their liquor cabinets. They held massive, nihilistic block parties. If we're going to die in 150 days, let's enjoy it. Crime skyrocketed, but not for survival, for thrill. The social contract evaporated. Why follow the law if there is no future? 3. The preppers, the bunker mentality. These are the people who saw this coming. They had the beans, the bullets, and the bandages. They bugged out. They left the cities and headed for the hills. They set up defensive perimeters. They trusted no one. The rural areas became no-go zones. If you drove up a driveway in Montana or the Scottish Highlands, you were met with a shotgun. The psychological toll on the children was the most heartbreaking. How do you explain to a 10-year-old why they can't go to school, why they can't see their friends, why mommy and daddy are crying in the kitchen? Teachers tried to hold classes over Zoom, but what's the point of teaching algebra when the sky is falling? Phase 5, the religious awakening. The arrival of 3I Atlas shattered religious dogma for some, but supercharged it for others. The Vatican issued a statement: God's creation is vast. Our brothers and sisters in the stars are also his children. They tried to frame it as a spiritual reunion, but the fundamentalist doomsday cults saw it differently. To them, 3I Atlas wasn't a ship. It was wormhood. It was the star of the apocalypse from the book of Revelation. The third angel sounded his trumpet, and a great star, blazing like a torch, fell from the sky. New cults sprang up overnight. The children of the loop believed that if they worshipped the object, it would spare them. They stood on rooftops, flashing mirrors at the sky, trying to signal their submission. The cleansers believed the aliens were demons sent to punish human sin. They started attacking sinners, scientists, politicians, anyone they blamed for bringing this wrath upon us. The religious violence became so bad that the military had to guard churches and mosques. Phase 6. The elite exodus. While the poor fought for bread in the streets, the rich were fighting for seats. We always knew there were bunkers. We knew about the luxury silos in New Zealand and the converted missile silos in Kansas. But we didn't know about the ARC program. Leaked flight logs showed a massive exodus of private jets leaving Los Angeles, London, and New York, heading to remote airfields in the southern hemisphere, places like Patagonia and Tasmania. Why south? Because 3I Atlas is approaching from the northern celestial hemisphere. The south is the safe side of the planet for a little while longer. Rumors swirled that Elon Musk and other tech billionaires were launching private rockets. Not to Mars, that takes too long, but to the moon, or to secret orbital habitats. This enraged the public. The realization that they were leaving us behind caused the riots to turn into revolutions. In Paris, the mob stormed the private airports. They burned the Gulfstream jets on the runway. The message was clear: if we burn, you burn with us. Phase 7, the silence of the grid. By February, the infrastructure began to fail. Not because of the aliens, but because of the humans. Power plant workers stopped showing up. Why run the reactor if your family is unsafe? Truck drivers stopped driving. Doctors stopped going to the hospitals. The lights started to flicker. The internet became spotty. The water pressure dropped. We did the aliens' job for them. We dismantled our own civilization before they even fired a shot. The cities became death traps. Without electricity, the elevators stopped. The pumps stopped. The sewage backed up. The high-rise apartments became vertical coffins. The migration began. Millions of people walking out of the cities, clogging the highways, looking for food, looking for safety, looking for a place where the sky didn't feel so heavy. It was the trail of tears, multiplied by 1 billion. Phase 8, the final realization. And then, in the middle of the chaos, 3I Atlas did something that made us all stop fighting. It turned on its main drive. Up until now, it had been coasting. But on February 15th, the object lit up the night sky like a second moon. The exhaust plume from its engine was millions of miles long. It was a blue-white spear of plasma that cut through the darkness. You could see it during the day. It was no longer a dot. It was a shape. You could see the central body. You could see the drones. It hung there, getting bigger every night. A sword of Damocles. The sight of it broke the deniers. You can't deny a starship that is bright enough to cast a shadow. The sight of it silenced the political squabbles. Republicans and Democrats, left and right, it didn't matter anymore. The political spectrum is irrelevant when you are facing a Type II civilization. The human response shifted from panic to awe and finally to resignation. People stopped rioting, they stopped running, they just waited. They gathered in parks, they sat on their roofs, they watched the blue light get closer. There is a strange peace in knowing the end is inevitable. The anxiety comes from hope. When hope is gone, the anxiety goes with it. We realize that we are not the main characters of this story. We are the background noise. We are the ants on the mound, watching the boot come down. The human response was a tragedy in 3 acts. 1. Denial. It's not real. 2. Anger. Why aren't they saving us? 3. Acceptance. So this is how it ends. But the military hasn't accepted it. In the mountains of Colorado, deep inside Cheyenne Mountain, the generals are still looking at the screens. They are still counting down. They have 1 card left to play. Project Hammer. They know that launching nukes might doom us. They know it might be suicide, but it's the only move they have. And as the human response fades into silence, the machine response begins. The silos are opening. The keys are turning. We are about to throw a stone at a tank. And we are praying that the tank flinches. Section 7, the countdown. The end of the world has a sound. It isn't a bang. It isn't a scream. It is the synchronized, mechanical hum of hydraulic blast doors sliding open in the middle of the North Dakota prairie. It is the sound of a key turning in a lock that hasn't been touched since the Cold War. We are now in the final phase. The countdown. Everything we have discussed so far, the denial, the discovery, the panic, the collapse, was just the prologue. This is the main event. T-minus 30 days, the ultimatum. By late March, 3I Atlas was visible to the naked eye even at noon. It looked like a blue scar cut into the fabric of the sky. At night, it was terrifying. The exhaust plume from its braking maneuver spanned 40 degrees of the horizon. It bathed the earth in a ghostly, unnatural twilight. The birds stopped singing. The tides began to shift erratically, pulled by the gravitational anomaly of the incoming mass. In the Situation Room, the debate was over. The doves had lost. The hawks had won. The decision to launch Project Hammer was made on March 24th. The logic was cold and binary. Scenario A, we do nothing. The entity arrives, encircles Earth, and begins the harvest. Probability of human extinction, 99%. Scenario B, we strike. We use every nuclear weapon in our arsenal to try and disrupt its trajectory, destroy its sensors, or blind it. Probability of success, unknown. Probability of retaliation, high. But high is better than certain. The president addressed the nation. He didn't use a teleprompter. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had aged 20 years in 20 weeks. My fellow citizens, he said, we have tried to communicate. We have tried to understand. But the object approaching our world has shown no interest in peace. It has shown only the cold intent of a predator. Tonight, we will not go quietly into the night. We will not vanish without a fight. It was a speech written for history books that might never be printed. T-minus 7 days. The launch didn't happen all at once. It was a staggered sequence to overwhelm the entity's point defense systems. Wave 1, the kinetic interceptors. These were modified ICBMs stripped of their warheads and loaded with solid tungsten rods. Rods from God. Their job was to force the entity to expend energy, to make it dodge, to test its reflexes. Wave 2, the nuclear tipless missiles. Hundreds of decoys. Dummy warheads designed to look like nukes on radar. Wave 3, the hammer. 50 high-yield thermonuclear warheads, Minuteman III and Trident II D5s, programmed to detonate in a specific pattern around the object. The goal wasn't just to hit it. It was to create a shaped charge of plasma that would crack its hull. The world watched the launch on their phones, huddled in basements, or standing on rooftops. The sky was filled with streaks of fire rising from the silos in America, Russia, and China. For the first time in history, the superpowers weren't aiming at each other. We were aiming up. It took the missiles 3 days to cross the void, 3 days of silence, 3 days of holding our breath, T-minus 4 days. The impact, the telemetry from the lead missiles reached Earth at 9:00 UTC. The entity didn't dodge. It didn't flinch. When the Wave 1 kinetic rods got within 5,000 kilometers, 3I Atlas reacted. But not with a laser, not with a shield. It reacted with dust. The object vented a massive cloud of microscopic particulate matter, a shimmering, metallic fog. The The kinetic rods hit the dust cloud at 20,000 miles per hour. At that speed, hitting a grain of sand is like hitting a landmine. The rods vaporized instantly. They turned into streaks of plasma before they could even scratch the paint of the mothership. Wave 1 was gone. Then came Wave 3, the nukes. The strategy was to detonate before hitting the dust, to use the radiation to burn through the cloud. At 09:15 UTC, the sky lit up. Even though the explosion was millions of miles away, the flash was bright enough to blind sensors on Earth. 50 nuclear suns were born and died in a single second. The radiation wave slammed into 3I Atlas. The cheers in the control rooms were short-lived, because when the smoke cleared, the object was still there, and it was glowing. Remember the absorption theory? The fear that we might feed it, we fed it. The blue exhaust plume turned violet. The spectral output of the object spiked by 400%. We had just given it a massive injection of high-grade energy. We recharged its batteries. And then it hit back. T-3 days, the retaliation. It wasn't a bomb. It wasn't a laser beam that blew up the White House. It was far more elegant and far more cruel. 3I Atlas pulsed its magnetic field. It targeted the ionosphere, the layer of Earth's atmosphere that reflects radio waves. The pulse ionized the upper atmosphere, creating a global, permanent aurora borealis. The sky turned a sickly, neon green, but the beauty was deadly. The ionization scrambled all long-range communications. GPS failed. Satellite internet failed. High-frequency radio failed. The Tower of Babel effect. The generals in the US couldn't talk to the generals in Europe. The submarines lost contact with the Pentagon. The pilots in the air went blind. We were deaf, dumb, and blind. The global defense network collapsed in an hour. And then the drones made their move. The 4 drones, Alpha, Beta, Gamma, Delta, broke formation. They accelerated toward Earth at 50 GS, a speed that would turn a human pilot into jelly. They took up positions at the 4 cardinal points of Earth's orbit, North Pole, South Pole, and 2 on the equator. They began to spin. They spun a web of laser light between them, creating a tetrahedron, a pyramid of light encasing the planet. We were in the cage. T-24 hours. The arrival. The main body of 3I Atlas arrived at the intercept point. It didn't enter the atmosphere. It parked itself in high Earth orbit, GEO, exactly 35,786 kilometers above the surface. It is huge. From the ground, it looks like a second moon, but angular, dark, foreboding. It hangs perfectly still over the Atlantic Ocean. The tides reacted instantly. Massive storm surges hit the coasts of the Americas and Europe. The gravity of the object is tugging at our oceans, creating king tides that swallowed islands whole. But the scariest thing isn't the water. It's the silence. The object isn't transmitting anymore. The 618 gigahertz signal stopped the moment it entered orbit. It is just watching. T-1 hour, the message. And then every screen on Earth turned on. It didn't matter if your phone was off. It didn't matter if your TV was unplugged. If it had a screen and a battery, it woke up. This suggests they have hacked our hardware at the root level. They understand our technology better than we do. There was no alien face. No, take me to your leader. Just text, simple white text on a black background, in every language simultaneously. English, Chinese, Spanish, Arabic, Hindi. The message was 3 words. Optimization protocol initiated. Optimization, not extermination. Not invasion. Optimization. What does you do when you optimize a hard drive? You delete the junk files. You defragment the data. You wipe the corruption. We are the corruption. T-0, the sky opens. The bottom of the 3I Atlas ship opened. A massive iris, kilometers wide. A beam of light, not a laser, but a tractor beam, a gravity lift, a vacuum, descended slowly toward the ocean. It hit the water. Millions of tons of seawater began to rise into the sky. It was harvesting the ocean. It was refueling with our water. But then the beam shifted. It moved toward the land, toward the cities, not with a bang, but with the realization of what optimization means. It means they aren't here to kill us because they hate us. They are here to fix the planet. And the only thing wrong with the planet is us. Fade to black. Epilogue/post-credit scene. A grainy video file recovered from a bunker years later. A scientist is speaking into a camera. The room is shaking. Dust is falling from the ceiling. Scientist. If anyone finds this, you need to know we were wrong. It wasn't a von Neumann probe. It wasn't a biological entity. It was a terraformers. They are gardening, and we are just the weeds.